Hey, all you happy lost souls. I know it's been a little bit, but this is a longer video. Took a little bit of time, went to a few locations, did a little bit of filming. But that's Sully the Lux Snail. He's kind of like the mascot of the channel, and Sully says subscribe. So if you like this content, original music, all kinds of stuff about lost cultures in North America, ancient artifacts, all kinds of cool things about local history, a hodgepodge of philosophy, art, just cool long form conversations. It's a place where you're not going to find any kind of artificial voiceovers or AI. Some of the filming is crude and almost point of view, Blair Witchy in style. It's just kind of how I've always done things. And I try to bring topics and information that kind of is lost to history and requires more research and open mind, critical thinking. So I put these topics out there, and my hope is that they interest you and encourage you to research into different areas that you previously maybe didn't have any kind of interest, or maybe it sparks some sort of creativity or inspiration. This video is a continuation of my research into George Washington and a possible unknown secret encampment along the Pennypack known as the Wynkoop Manor. He was very good friends with George Washington. Wynkoop was also one of the colonial council members, like an early, version of a congressman before the Continental Congress was fully formed. And he's connected also. I have some videos about the silver mine stuff. But what I wanted to do in this video is start by showing you a known recently, within the last 20-30 years, I helped work on this project way back a little bit. It's called the Moland House, and also known as the Neshaminy ENCAMPMENT. Now, this old house sits on Old York Road, right before the Neshaminy Creek, and in the 1700s, there was the only bridge crossing that creek there. It was a very important strategic location. And the beginning of the video shows pictures, images, and things from that property. And I walked around that property. And then the second half of the video shows my walkthrough and different images of the Wynkoop Manor, and showing you how similar these locations are, how they were set up for defense, how they're both surrounded by creeks for protection, and also always on the high ground because Washington was a surveyor. But we'll start with the Moland House, since that's the beginning of the video. The Moland House, also known as the Neshaminy ENCAMPMENT. George Washington and a whole slew of other really historically notable figures had a war council at Widow Moland's house. And they fortified the home, and you can still see the ramparts and defensive structures to this day surrounding the home. They were there in the year of 1777, from August 10th to August 23rd, for about a 2-week period. And they were here prior to locating the British's position. That's what they were trying to do. They were trying to strategize after the British landed in Maryland. They essentially wanted to figure out if they were moving towards Philadelphia or not, where their positions were exactly, and some of the notable attendees at the Moland House. And the Moland House is in Warwick Township. It's right past Warminster and Warrington, right on Old York Road. And further south on Old York Road, as you head towards Willow Grove, you just turn off onto Terwood, and it pretty much dead ends you down into Wynkoops Manor. So they were connected, very close in proximity. And really what I had to do is figure out when he would have been at this secret encampment at Wynkoops. We know when he was at the Moland House, and this archaeology only happened, like, they were going to knock that whole house down. No one even knew that there was a war council there in 1777 until very recently, until they did some archaeology. And then they decided to make the whole property a historical preservation and save it. And I think even one of the historical societies is located there at the Moland House. And you'll see in this video me walking through the grounds. And I also took images of a house that sits right above that on a road, I think, called Turkey Trot. It sits up on the high point overlooking the Moland House. And this is also an ancient house that's been fortified, and it looks like a perfect house for the quartermaster and the supply arm of the army. Now, who was there at this war council? The first most notable person was the chief and commander, George Washington. Okay, the most significant thing that happened was Marquis de Lafayette was at this house, and it's where he first met George Washington. And the reason that is so important is because it kind of solidified the relationship between the colonial army and the French army, and they hit it off. There was also a guy named Count Kasimir Pulaski, and Pulaski was a Polish nobleman who was a super skilled cavalry commander. Then a name that most people know, General Nathaniel Greene, is pretty much Washington's right-hand man. Then you had General Knox and Graham. General Knox was an artillery genius, and it's Fort Knox is named after. And Graham, he was a quartermaster, along with another very famous person that became later famous, Alexander Hamilton, was also at Wynkoops. You also had John Sullivan, William Alexander, known as Lord Sterling, Mad Anthony Wayne, and Adam Stephan were some other notable figures at this war council. So there's founding fathers. There was one of the most important military people on the side of the French for influence and for relationships. Now, what I really want to stress is how this property is laid out, almost identical to Wynkoops. You have Creek Road right next to the Moland House. You have Creek Road right next to the Wynkoop House. You have built-up ramparts and earthen fortifications. You have streets in the area that bear names like Camp Meeting. In the case of the Wynkoop Manor, you have Lookout Point, Overlook, Grey Horse, Division, Morgan Mill, which was named after the town back then, was known as Morganville. The area of what is now Willow Grove, where Davisville runs through, was known as Morgan's Mill. And at the end of the video, I included a bunch of pictures of the mills that still run along the Pennypack. There's also mills along the Neshaminy. This is so important because these mills were all in colonial hands, and you had 11,000 person army almost that needed to be resupplied. Now, as the video plays out, you'll see the Moland House first, and then the second half of the video are images of the surrounding lands and areas around the Wynkoop Manor, which is still not a known Washington encampment site. It's my purpose to prove that the Wynkoop Manor was used as an encampment. And it is actually a rear guard or fallback position. And I can tell you exactly when they were there based on the timeline of Washington's movements. The other very interesting thing is all of the legend and lore surrounding that area in the Pennypack around Wynkoops. I talked to members of the preservations. They said there's countless numbers of wells. They have no idea why all these wells are out in the fields. Most likely the troops were encamped here, and this was after they retreated out of Germantown. My biggest obstacle was trying to figure out whether they were there as a launch point to stage the Battle of Philadelphia and the Philadelphia campaign, or they fell back to there. And based on the timeline, it's pretty clear, and that's what I'm going to go through right now, the timeline. So let me find that real quick in my notes here. I actually had to take notes for this one because there's a lot of timelines and dates, and I included most of them in the video as images. So we'll go through the timeline real quick. So after he assesses the British troop movements and realizes they landed in Elks Head, Maryland, and they were planning on taking Philadelphia, they had to plan the defense of Philadelphia. So the movements after August 23rd from the Moland House, he leaves the Moland House from August 24th to September 3rd, 1777. He marches southwest through Montgomery and Chester County. By 9/6 through September 9th of 1777, he took position at Chad's Ford. Okay, Washington was all back and forth through this area. 9/11, 1777, the Battle of Brandywine occurs. 9/11, 77, he was defeated at Brandywine. So after 9/11, 1777, he retreated and he did a strategic retreat and regroup that lasted between September 12th and 14th. And he moves north of Philly, where there was a small skirmish on September 16th, 77, known as the Battle of the Clouds. Kind of inconsequential, just a skirmish. In 1777, September 17th through the 19th, he crosses the Schuylkill and heads northwest to regroup. By September 26, 1777, the British had moved in and occupied Philadelphia. By October 4th, Washington had caught up and staged like a four-prong attack, 4 different lines, kind of in a pincer-type movement, trying to attack north and south of Germantown and surround the British. That was October 4th, 1777. The next recorded movement wasn't until the skirmish, which was more of the British probing Washington's new position, as I believe on October 4th, when he retreated from Germantown down Washington Lane, which was named after the retreat. If you follow Washington Lane, it dead ends right into the fortified remnants of ramparts and fortified earthworks right on, at Wynkoops Manor. So it's my belief that the time period was between October 4th, that month, to 2 months when he fell back from the Battle of Germantown. I believe he fell back to Wynkoop. He then used the high ground that Terwood Road runs on. Terwood Road is a major intersection. It intersects with Old York Road at Old York Road's highest point, known as Horse Heaven. Along this point, there's some other names that have super Revolutionary War connections. There's Reed's Hill, which still looks like a flattened off hilltop cannon emplacement. And we know Reed was a very important figure in Philadelphia, and he was also under Knox in charge of artillery emplacements. You have Knox and Graham Road right off of Terwood that lead up to this old house that looks like it's from the 1700s, and it was possibly the quartermaster's location, as Graham was the quartermaster and so was Knox. These are right off of actually Welsh Road, which connects to Terwood via Washington Lane. So it's right off of Washington Lane, Knox Road, which was his artillery commander, and Graham, which was his quartermaster. So obviously a camp has to be nearby. And then if you, I included some of the pictures of the overhead of Wynkoops, and it's an elevation map. and you can see the straight lines and edges of purposely made defensive earthworks. And you can see Washington's Lane run right into one of the old ramparts. So this was not the area that he launched the attack of Philadelphia from. Based on his movements and timelines, this was the area that he fell back or retreated to. And it was the rear guard. Because, like I said, Wynkoop's manor sits right at the intersection of Edge Hill and Terwood Road. And Terwood Road is a high ground. It runs along a ridge. And we know that during the Battle of Edge Hill, he was way further south on... well, he's way further... You're heading east, or you're heading west. He was further west on Terwood Road, up towards... when you're getting into Abington and Upper Dublin, and it leads right into Fort Washington area, which we know was fortified. And currently there's like a bar down in Ambler, Fort Washington, called McGurk's. There's an old church called St. Thomas in the Labyrinth. I believe that church is actually sitting on one of the old fortifications for the actual fortification of Fort Washington in that area. There's also this little island on the old maps of the battle that show a fortified island in the middle of the Wissahickon, right at this Fort Washington location. And this is the position he was in during the Battle of Edge Hill, which was December 7th, 1777. So almost 2 months there's a gap in where Washington was, and it's within those 2 months between the Battle of Germantown, October 4th, 1777, and the Battle of Edge Hill, which was just a late skirmish from a probing or scouting mission by the British. And they kind of probed, saw Washington's defenses, were trying to outflank Washington. Washington saw that he could be outflanked, so he moved out of the area and he headed down what is now Route 73 or Skip Pack Pike, and he headed up to an intersection. There's Broad Axe Tavern is there right now, and he hooked a left. I think it's 313, I'm not positive, the intersection there, and he headed straight towards what would be the encampment of Valley Forge that is so famous, when he got the high ground to keep an eye on the British occupation of Philadelphia. The reason I think this was involved in this whole Philadelphia campaign are all the street names, the overhead views that kind of match other encampment sites, the comparison between the area around the Pennypack, the area of Valley Forge, and the Moland House, 3 different encampments that all bear striking similarities left scarred into the land, whether it be defensive earthworks. I included a picture of my neighborhood, the Tower, and that's the highest point in Montgomery County. So obviously when Washington's war journal and the documented movements after Germantown said he moved to the high ground surrounding White Marsh. And back then, the highest area in Montgomery County is where that tower is. So that's where Lookout is, Overlook, and it looks directly over the entire, what would have been the encampment site. And in this neighborhood, you also have Morgan Mill, and Morgan was a huge supporter of Washington. So all the mills in the area were controlled by him, and they were loyal to Washington's men, and it would be a perfect area to supply the entire army, to resupply them before they had to head out. You had all the grist mills. The Pennypack had the most mills on the East Coast, essentially, at the time in the colonial times. I put some pictures of some of the old mills that still stand, and some of the more modern mills that were built on top of the old mills that replaced them, that are now, they're restructured into houses and inns. They're no longer active mills. I just wanted to include some of them in the video. And that's why the area was so important. It was the highest ground overlooking Philadelphia. It was the safest place because they were in a pro-colonial environment, neighborhood area where the locals would help and aid them. There were tons of different mills. There was mills for masonry. There were mills for textiles. There were mills for grain. And Terwood Road turns into Fitzwatertown because what it connects is it connects Fetter's Mill, which is one of the oldest mills in the area, established in the 1600s, and Terwood, or Fetter's Wood, because of Fetter's Mill and the man Fetter. The French kind of took off the FE and it became Terwood. But Terwood Road connected pretty much Flourtown with the mills down in the Pennypack. So the John Fitzwatertown, who had a mill that connected Fitzwatertown Road with Fetter's Mill, you were transporting a lot of flour down Terwood Road, having it processed and then shipped back up to Flourtown. So it was grown in Flourtown, packaged up, sent down to be processed with all the mills and production sites along the Pennypack. And literally, if you walk along the Pennypack to this day, you can see the remnants, the scars, the old archaeology foundations, all the old dams and spillways that were created in the 17, 18, and early 1900s, while this whole area of the Pennypack was just a super explosive industrial manufacturing area back then. One of the largest, like I said, on the East Coast. So on the Wynkoop property, there's also these enormous large cellars that I haven't gotten a chance to get back to take pictures of. And they're probably about, I don't know, I would say they're about maybe 30 to 50 feet by 20 to 30 feet wide, like a giant rectangle. And they go down probably a good 15 feet deep, all stone lined. And they're perfectly flush with the ground. So if you were to have covered these with wood or branches and leaves, you would never know they were there. There's some sort of storage chambers. They could be drafting cellars, but they look more like munition storage areas for weapons, guns, to hide them. And these pits were dug on high ground away from all flooding and water from the creek. So, not to mention, through my own archaeology, and can't really dig in a lot of these areas because they're preservations, but if you walk the creeks nearby, you look for, or in the fields, you look for any kind of surface finds. I have found a lot of stuff that could be tied to either the Revolution or the French and Indian War. I have an old spoon with a militia number scratched on it, almost like an old dog tag. It's silver. These spoons date it between like 1705 and 1706 for their production. Found many examples of broken glass bottles from the time period back there, whether they're cobalt blue or they're leaded black French glass. I found a clay pipe in the shape of a cannon dating from that time period, but maybe even earlier. I found several dominoes that are French in origin and made from ivory, so they're very old as well. All of these little finds, I found a few buttons dating back to that time period. I'll include some images at the very end of the video of some of the colonial artifacts that I've come across surrounding these sites and whatnot. So really, that's what this video is. And like I said, these little videos that I've been putting out are just kind of teasers or smaller videos to this much larger documentary that will eventually be released, that ties the silver mines, the encampments, the Revolutionary War, the Dones Gang, that ties all of that together. But this, in my opinion, through my research, through the feel you get, being in all these areas, I am like 98.8% sure that that's a lost encampment, and I'm positive that the time period that it was used was between October 4th and December 7th of 1777, during the Philadelphia campaign. And a lot of Washington's movements are unknown. He was very secretive, purposely left misleading movements in his notes, put places that he was never at in his journals. So when you're trying to recreate his movements, you kind of have to use the archaeology you find to support where he was. You can't really just go by the records. There's missing parts of the records. When you're at war, you need to disguise your movements, especially in those time periods when that was so important. You didn't have overhead surveillance. You didn't have technology. So your goal was like a dance across a large, vast area of land. In these troop movements, one army's always trying to outflank another. So the troop movements always in colonial and Napoleonic warfare always dependent on not letting yourself be flanked or letting yourself get teed up. So letting the opposing army march down your lines. So getting to the end of your lines and turning them and then marching down and just destroying everything. So being flanked was the most important thing you wanted to avoid in any kind of colonial or what we would refer to as Napoleonic style type warfare. This classical line up and shoot at each other because our weapons are really inaccurate type stuff. Now, the other thing, the other creepy thing about the Neshaminy site is as I'm walking through that site, you see that there's a clearing with like new trees that have started to grow up. This clearing in this area was actually like within the camp's defenses, and it's where a lot of the troops camped. Now there are markers around these trees. Many a contingency of troops got very sick at the Neshaminy encampment, and several dozen of them, I believe a dozen or so, died and are actually buried around the lands around that manor. They died of dysentery from drinking out of the nearby creek, but also using the nearby creek to bathe, urinate, to do all of their cleaning and sanitation, not knowing that then drinking that water led to the dysentery that led to the deaths of a decent amount of people that are buried on that land. And I believe some of the trees even have markers where they found remains and stuff from their archaeological surveys. I wasn't directly involved with the Moland House restoration, but I did work behind the scenes. It was a couple ex-girlfriends ago. It was my high school sweetheart, actually. I believe her mom was working on some of the interior remodeling and working on the project of restoring the home because it was dilapidated, ran down for years. I mean, that house in the pictures looks beautiful and redone, but 20, 25 years ago, it had no windows. It had trees growing out of it. It was about to be bulldozed. And what they do with any old homes like that from the 1700s is they'll do an archaeological survey before they just start knocking things down and building them to see if there's anything of importance. And sure enough, they found tons of archaeology that led to them figuring out that this was a meeting, an encampment, a meeting site, and a war council. And like I said, the most important thing that came out of the Moland House war council meeting was Marquis de Lafayette met Washington. It was the first time they met, so it's extremely significant. And it was where they strategized to defend Philadelphia. And if you look on maps back then, there's hardly any roads like there are now. So you want to look at the ones that still exist to figure out where they moved and how they moved. Use old street names. Why are things named this? But I'm almost 100% convinced at this point that the main house that the Pennypack Preservation now uses as like their headquarters, it is a preserved historic home. Didn't go on the record till the 1790s. That doesn't mean that's when that house was built. Like I said, I talked to the preservation, and they let me know that when an archaeologist that specialized in ancient architectural design and things like that came in, he noticed that the older part of the house must have been much, much older before they knocked the wall out and added the second addition on in the later 1700s and the 1790s. He believed the house dated all the way back to the early 1700s with with certain elements and aspects, especially this built-in cubbyhole or cupboard into the one wall for a Bible. This kind of went out of favor like in the 1750s or 60s, so the house was probably really there in the 1750s or 60s, the first iteration of John Wynkoop. And the house is set up defensively. You can't see it from any road, but you can see all the roads from the house. It sits on the high point known as Top of the World. That looks parallel over to the other high point where the tower is in my photos, and that neighborhood with all the weird encampment type names like Division, Camp Meeting, Morganville, Lookout, Gray Horse. And Gray Horse was slang for the postal route of the camp. So it's where the person delivered the messages throughout the camp. And the Gray Horse, or the Gray Horse Express back then, was known as the mail delivery system for the camps. So that's why I keep mentioning Gray Horse as a name. Gray Horse, White Horse, these are both names usually used for messenger routes of encampments during battles or wars during that period of time. So really the research just draws on historical records, archaeological finds in the area, modeling the landscapes and man-made earthbound fortifications like ramparts that you can still see. Knowing that George Washington was a surveyor and knew the lands like the back of his hand from his campaigns during the Beaver Wars and French and Indian Wars, we knew that he would utilize all high ground. There's also legends that there's a bridge on Wynkoop's property, the oldest bridge in the area that still stands, known as Paper Mill. And the legends always go that the British attempted to cross Paper Mill Bridge there on a probing attack. So they might have gotten close to figuring out where Washington was and tried to flank him. And at the point when the British tried to cross Paper Mill Bridge and get behind Washington's lines, that's when he rotated his lines and headed west towards Fitzwatertown Road on Terwood and went back towards Fort Washington before finally exiting after the skirmish on December 7th after the Battle of Edge Hill, leaving a few days later, retreating for his winter camp at Valley Forge, the very famous brutal encampment site of Valley Forge. I hope you guys like this video. This isn't like a super detailed video. I just wanted to compare both properties and really put this theory forth that this was where Washington fell back, and he used this farmstead and this site with all of these mills that were under his control and were friendly to him, used this whole area as a resupply and strategic meeting place or rear guard after the Battle of Germantown on October 4th in 1777. And it's quite obvious when you start looking at the maps, doing research into the local archives, learning about the legends, and then finding some artifacts that sort of point to that same time period found in the creeks right around this location. So drawing upon all these different fields and using critical thinking and putting forth a theory and putting forth an idea and an abstract and a hypothesis is that during the time period of October 4th, 1777 and December 7th, George Washington used what is now Washington Lane, Tyson Avenue, Edge Hill, all to retreat from Germantown after the four-prong attack. It kind of went sideways. It failed a bit. It was very foggy. There was some friendly fire. And you can see all the street names down in Germantown, Philadelphia still. Wayne Avenue, Green Avenue, Washington Lane, Sullivan Avenue. You can see all of the names of all the generals and their attack routes. So it's not like I just pulled a random Washington street name out and said, oh, it relates to this battle. Also, whenever you're naming a street, if you put lane as its suffix instead of avenue, street, terrace, a lane is a military term meaning retreat, a lane of retreat. Generally, the word lane gets added on to street or road names when they were historically involved in battles, or had some sort of movement within a battle. And the fact that the most important thing is where a road starts and where it goes when you're trying to figure out why it was named that way. And it goes from the heart of where Washington's attack was in Germantown to where he was last known to retreat. And then Washington Lane snakes all the way back, goes all the way through Abington, through Jenkintown. It cuts across, and then Washington Lane crosses Valley Road, and it keeps going. And after it crosses Valley Road, there's two roads off of Washington Lane named Knox and Graham. Both of these are significant generals in Washington's army. And off of Knox Street, off of Washington Lane, leads up to this old house that looks just like the other property I showed you at the Moland House, that I believe was a suspected quartermaster location, or an area to gather supplies and to divvy them out, and to do some of the bureaucratic organization of supplying and aiding the army. So we have the quartermaster location with a quartermaster's name, Graham, and the artillery general's name, right off of Washington Lane. And then you have Washington Lane literally dead ending at Wynkoop's property. And then, more importantly, the road that runs through the entire preservation, which became a railroad track. And then in present day, all the rails are ripped up and it became like a main artery for the trail system. That's known as the Newtown line. That was an old cart path that led right from Wynkoop's property in the Pennypack directly to his big estate. He was kind of like the governor, essentially, of Pennsylvania, to his big estate in Newtown, which he oversaw the treasury with all the silver. So this is, again, where the silver legend and silver mine legend ties into it. Were they extracting a bunch of ore from the area? As the ancient legends say, the Native American silver mines, which I've located a few of the entrances to, are on those grounds. And all of the silver that we had in the entire colonial reserve was in the Newtown treasury, which was robbed by the Doane gang later on. Like, I think almost 10,000 pounds of silver was taken. We didn't even have any silver at the end of the war to print our first coins. The legend goes that Washington stole Martha's silverware to melt down the first coins. A lot of people say it's just a legend. But all the silver got stolen, was never recovered. It was still the largest robbery of a treasury or of a federal institution in the United States that's never been solved or recovered. Most of the Doane's gang, the one main Doane, I think Moses Doane, was chased off of a mountain at what is Ralph Stover's Park now, which is High Rocks, is where he jumped his horse off of to his death. He was chased down. The silver is apparently buried or possibly buried somewhere near a potter's field in Wrightsville. A lot of people think that the silver made its way to Canada because the Doanes had a lot of family up there who mysteriously lived on in good wealth out of nowhere for a long time. So it's possible that it got smuggled all the way to Canada, the silver from that heist of the Newtown treasury. But also on the same grounds, part of the preservation is known as Mason Mills Park, as Masons own most of the preservation. And the Audubon Society, which is also a branch and funded by Freemasonry, this is the same group that kind of own most of Valley Forge area and the park, and put in tons of money and donations. It's very weird that the Masons would be so involved in the area. They must have an idea, or they must know something that we don't, to preserve this area. With the Founding Fathers' connections with Freemasonry, I'm sure they know a whole lot more about that area than they tell any of us, and it's probably the ultimate reason they preserved it. as a preservation. And the Pennypack Preservation is strange because it's not a government foundation. It is a private, nonprofit board of trustees or organization that has taken the land and then bequeathed it or bestowed it to the public. So it's not government land, it's really private land donated to the public. So the rules are very different. It's not like parkland. It's not like going to Valley Forge where you can't touch anything, you can't explore, because it's all preserved under this National Preservation Act, because it's a national park and everything. That comes with its own laws and own rules. My goal really with bringing this research to light is to have some real archaeology done on that preservation to pretty quickly determine whether Washington's army was there. Also, all of the fields in the area. The main field right next to Wynkoop is famous for a festival they have every year known as a June Fete. It's a carnival. And these fields are very strange because there's no evidence that crops were being grown in them or anything. They're all horse fields left over from John Fraser in the 1800s who had horse farms. But those fields were already cleared out and he just let his horses onto them. He thought they were cleared out by natives and things way back in the day. But they also noted that the fields were awfully neat and clear back in there and cut out in a 90-degree staggered, almost staircase-like formation. So you have a field staggered with an elevated area with a bunch of woods, then another field. So it was set up very defensively. You could only enter these fields by making a large turn, which would expose your entire flank. I believe these were the fields where his army had retreated to and had resupplied, and it was the rear guard essentially after they attacked Philadelphia on October 4th, 1777. And my whole goal is just to have this proven because it means more funding for the preservation. It guarantees that the place will never be destroyed or built on if you can tie this significance. And we would also fill in a major gap up until that time period in Washington's troop movements and his timeline. Every day was almost documented until you hit the retreat of Germantown. And then there's a giant gap until December 7th. So there's this period of almost 2 months, where we have no idea where Washington was because the British didn't know. So we couldn't use their records to figure out where he was. And he never wrote down anything other than he was in the highest hills surrounding an area known as White Marsh. And like I said, in the 1700s, White Marsh was a way larger area. It included like Willow Grove, it included parts of Abington, Jenkintown, Ambler, which is all known as the White Marshes. And it was most likely called that because of the vast amount of ghost trees that I'm always talking about. All the sycamores, there's tons of them, making the forest look very bright and white almost. So I'm getting the name White Marsh. Definitely the area of Fort Washington, where he was known to be during that skirmish of the Battle of Edge Hill on December 7th. Definitely, he was definitely there, and I just lost my train of thought, but it's okay. We know he was definitely there, and that area was definitely on the maps known as White Marsh. But Willow Grove, even though Willow Grove was a town that's been around since the 1700s, Upper Moreland it's been around since the 1700s, even properties being here in the 1600s, possibly even the late 1500s if we go back to the Dutch and the early French explorers and Swedes that were along the creek. It just goes way back. And like I said, the name Willow Grove wasn't really on any maps back then. The maps called this area Morganville, and it was because the only structures in this whole little town back then were one inn. I think it was an inn that was more up towards where Old York Road goes through Willow Grove, and it sits right along a connector stream of the Pennypack later becomes Sandy Run, and because it goes underground. But this creek was considered like a mineral spring. Got Mineral Spring Road right there. This creek actually would flow through the inn, and you could come water all of your horses. Now, this is one of the only pro-colonial inns where the militia would meet in the area. So this is literally right down the street from Wynkoops, right down what is Davisville Road now. Back then it was called Morganville. The road had no name, essentially, till later on. So you have just a few little properties on the maps back then, and then you figure out, oh wait, all of these people are loyal to Washington, but then in the immediate areas north of him, in Philadelphia, the British had taken it over. In the areas north of him, it was all Tory and Buckingham. It's like Washington had to be very careful, especially when he was at the Moland House. He was only a couple miles from Buckingham, which was loaded with pro-British colonials that supported the British cause, known as Tories, and Buckingham was full of Tories. It's also from the area of Buckingham and like Pipersville, and that area is where the Doanes gang came from, which were a family of Quaker brothers, tall, athletic, formidable. They were spying for the British against Washington. They even passed word on to the German Hessians during Washington's crossing on the Christmas of 1776. He sent over a letter a week prior telling them that Washington intended on attacking them on Christmas, and the German general just crumpled it up, threw it away. And the legend goes that Washington had his Copa spy ring up and running at the time, which eventually became the CIA, and there was a very important woman named Betsy Ross who was employed by Washington as like a honeypot, and she went and had a romantic evening, dancing, laughing, having a date with this Hessian general, distracting him and leaving his troops unguarded and unorganized and leaderless, allowing Washington's surprise attack, which really saved the momentum and helped drag some of the foreign support, like the French support, into the war, winning battles like Saratoga and battles like the one Washington had pulled off on Christmas when he snuck attack across the Delaware. That publicity really gave Ben Franklin some ammunition to sell the war to the French. Look, guys, I kind of went on a tangent there at the end, like most of my videos do. I love you all. Please subscribe. Even if you're not super interested in like the George Washington stuff, this is more of figuring out historical mysteries that could lead to even treasures, possibly. Who knows? We could find like a lost buried munition store. Imagine finding a bunch of weapons and gunpowder stored away in some vault from the 1700s linked to George Washington. The incredible thing is that right in my own backyard in Philadelphia, I can retrace his movements right down York Road. And I can take you and show you places that the founding fathers had met, walked, and talked, 270 some years ago, So it's the birth of our country. Washington, the founding fathers have gotten a very bad rap because of divisive political rhetoric and nonsense, mainly derived from the far left in a lot of circumstances, and cancel culture, trying to cancel our forefathers simply because of there were different laws and rules, especially regarding the concept of slavery in those times. And you can't look at our founding fathers that wrote the Constitution and point to them and tell me that they're racist. And the whole thing is, oh, they're racist because they own slaves. Well, this is my biggest pet peeve. Slavery is nothing to do with racism. It was sold to you as racism. But slavery is a human condition. It's existed since civilization has existed. It's existed for all time. Slavery is just the weak exploiting the weaker, and that's what humans do. We continue to do it. There is more slavery now than there was during the 1800s in the antebellum South. There was also near 3,000 free black men and black families in the South that owned black slaves. Not to mention the first 250,000 slaves in the New World, in the colonial time period. This is in the 1700s. They were all Irish, and they were mostly Irish women and children. An Irish slave, they were called something a little bit different. It's called indentured servant, same thing as a slave. Essentially, you could buy an Irish slave for a pack of cigarettes, whereas an African slave cost as much as a house back then. Large groups of Native Americans were enslaved, large other groups of white people that were vagrant. So back in those times, if you were poor and homeless, you were enslaved. There wasn't like charity or social security or welfare or Section 5. You were just put into indentured servitude or made a slave. Slavery existed for all races through all time. And yes, there were racists that participated in slavery, and there's racial components of it. But slavery in itself is not inherently racist. And the second you start pointing blame at people today that had nothing to do with the past, only by distant relation and ancestry, you're just a moron. Because like, what happens when you start paying reparations? You can't just say, all this race gets reparations but not this one, because every race has experienced large amounts of slavery throughout their history. So is everyone getting a check? How about all the free black slave owners? Do they get a check? What about all the white slaves and all the Native American slaves? Do all their descendants get a check? Slavery just existed worldwide and globally for all of time, ever since humans organized into society, and even before that probably. So that's my feeling on that. But anyways, guys, I'm going to cut it off here. Please subscribe. I love you all, and peace.